Luxury brands have been mastering the art of creating desire since their rise in the early 1900s, but some brands do it better than others. Some of these luxury brands are able to take plain old pieces and turn them into symbols of status, desire, success, and even wealth. But I feel like Hermes is the brand that is most notorious for their game mindset, which means that you can no longer walk into one of their boutiques and just ask for one of their most popular, most sought after bags, the holy trinity of Hermes bags, the Birkin, the Kelly, or the Constance. If you would like to take one of these pieces home, you will either have to jump through hoops, wait years, or spend a small fortune, but that wasn't always the case. So today I thought it would be fun for us to take a walk down memory lane and discuss how and why this quota system started, what you have to know about it today, and what other brands have taken inspiration from Hermes and cultivated their very own wait lists, some justified, some artificially inflated, in my humble opinion. But if you would like to hear my thoughts on some of the most exclusive luxury pieces out there, the ones that you will either have to jump through hoops to get your hands on, or pretty much sell your soul for, as well as the reason we keep going back for more, then make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe down below if you haven't done so yet, and keep on watching. Let's for a second pretend that you've never been to Hermes and you've never heard this term quota system or quota bag. What does it really mean? Well, the quota system in theory allows each customer, or I should say customer profile, to buy 2 bags each year. It basically limits the number of bags each customer is able to buy. This does not guarantee that you will be offered 2 bags within 1 year, but if you do end up getting offered bags throughout the year, you can pick 2 of them that you are allowed to buy. What are quota bags? So quota bags include things like the different variations of a Birkin, traditional Kelly bags. This does not include Kelly adjacent bags, so things like the Kelly pochette and the Kelly cut, unless those bags are made of exotic skin, because if you pick up a Kelly pochette or a Kelly cut in lizard or in alligator or croc, most boutiques will consider those a quota bag. And then while the Constance is not technically a quota bag, some boutiques at this point will consider it as one. And then again, if you buy a Constance in mainly croc, your boutique might consider it a quota bag too, but it's something that you have to ask about. The Constance at this point is kind of a gray area, and so are Kelly adjacent bags, but most importantly, the Birkin and the Kelly are always going to be things called a quota bag, which you can buy 2 of each year. But this wasn't always the case. The quota system was first put in place, I want to say in the early 2000s, maybe around 2004, 2005, because before that, for a short period, they had a wait list. Once the Birkin bag started taking off and it became a thing for people to carry a Birkin, Hermes had a really hard time figuring out who these bags should go to. So for a really, really short period, they had a wait list. But before then, in theory, you could walk into Hermes, and if they had one of these bags on shelves or maybe in the back, you could just buy one right on the spot. It's not something that you had to wait for or something that you had to qualify to get your hands on. And the reason this quota bag system was put in place, well, first of all, I do think that a lot of it is to create scarcity and to increase the exclusivity of this bag, but also to make the game a little bit more fair, because I think what Hermes found is that a lot of these bags ended up going to the very same people, the people who had the time to just stop by Hermes on a regular basis and ask about these bags. So instead of allocating the very limited stock they had to the very same people, they decided that they would limit each customer to a set number of bags, which in theory would allow other people to also get the chance to get their hands on the bags they truly wanted. And while it was a noble idea, sadly, it's something that was very often taken advantage of, and people found loopholes because let's be honest, most people are just greedy. So it's not something that worked out quite as well as Hermes had hoped, especially because there were no clear guidelines. There wasn't a consistent system that was global that made it easy for people to understand how to get their hands on these bags. A lot of people felt taken advantage of because they were not given clear guidance on how to navigate this system. So it's not something that I think was really well received, but I do appreciate the original idea, and I do think that it was, perhaps the intention was right, the execution could have been a little bit more refined in my humble opinion. But what do you have to know about the quota bag system today? So you're still limited to buying 2 bags within 1 year. There was a point in time when you were limited to buying 1 bag in the first half of the year and then another in the second half. These days you can buy 2 bags pretty much anytime you want. I know that my local boutique no longer allows customers to buy 2 bags really close to each other just because they want to make it a little bit more fair for other people. So they don't want someone to buy a quota bag in January and 2 weeks later be offered another bag when there might be hundreds of people out there who have never received a bag offer or who are just waiting for their next offer. They do want someone else to get the chance to be offered a bag instead of all the bags going to the very same people. But it's something that you will have to ask your store about because it will come down to your specific store's guidelines and the store manager, who is basically the gatekeeper of quota bags. They are the ones who will decide who these bags go to. Now, of course, there is a lot that goes into consideration. Hermes very closely tracks your spending and how much respect and appreciation you have for the brand, but your spending is extremely easy to track because it is at the very top of your profile. So if you look at your very own Hermes profile, you can of course not look at anyone else's, but I think you can ask to look at your own. The first thing you will see is the amount of money that you spent within the past year. I think it is within the past year, so it's something that Hermes can track. And if you are a serious client, that can definitely accelerate the process of getting your hands on a bag. But I would not want you to just start spending money because that will still not guarantee that you will be offered the bag that you want. You might be offered a bag, but it might not be the bag that you want. So if that's the only reason you're spending a small fortune at Hermes, that might lead to disappointment and even resentment down the line. But let's say you are ready to put in a wish, you understand how the quota bag system works. How would you go about doing that? Just because Hermes is so insanely popular at this point, you can no longer put in a wish whenever you want to. In the past, if you were a serious client, if Hermes felt like that you have explored enough of a brand for you to qualify for one of their quota bags, they could ask you anytime within the year to put in a wish for a bag or to put in a request, and then it was up to your sales associate or your sales advisor to find that bag for you, track it down, and basically make a case in front of the store manager that you are worthy of getting that bag, which not only put a lot of pressure on sales associates, but it also gave them a lot of power, which rumor has it a lot of them abused and took advantage of. So that was taken away, and now a couple times a year they will open up the wish list. It's going to be at the same time for every single customer. You will get an invitation from your sales associate to go into the store and place a wish in person. It's something that is going to be done in their system, so on their phones or on an iPad. They will walk you through the exact steps. You will have to choose a style for the bag, size, color, and you'll even have to pick specific colors and specific leathers, and you can put in notes. So if you're open to a surprise bag or if you're open to exceptional pieces, that is something that can always be included on your wish, but it's not something that you can just request anytime you want to. There are going to be set dates within a year when the wish list opens up, and then as soon as the wish list is full, they'll close it again and they will only open it up once enough wishes have been granted. And usually the wish list is reserved for local clients, which is one of the reasons Kelly pochettes and Kelly cuts have become so insanely difficult to get, because the quota bag system used to be local, whereas now it is pretty much global at this point, at least Europe-wide. Every single store can see your purchase history when it comes to Birkins and Kellys, which means that a lot of customers who previously were able to hop between countries, so if someone lived in Germany, they could in theory go to Italy and get 2 quota bags, then they could go to France to get another 2, then in their home country they could get 2 quota bags too. So there was this loophole that people were able to take advantage of. That's no longer the case, because as long as you have one profile and that's not something you're abusing, every single boutique in Europe is going to be able to see your purchase history when it comes to quota bags, so Birkins and Kellys. So what these people do, who in the past were customers that would hop in between countries to get their hands on bags, they will still travel and they will still ask for bags. They will still spend their money with other stores, but they will no longer ask for quota bags. Quota bags will be reserved for some of the larger stores that they shop at, obviously hoping that they'll be offered something a little bit more special or a little bit more rare, and instead they'll ask for things that are not quota bags, so things that will not show up on their profile. They might ask for a Constance, a Kelly Pochette, a Kelly Cot, or a Kelly Ellen, which is why these pieces are so insanely in demand at the moment, not only because these styles are popular, but also because a lot more people are asking for them. People who are seasoned Hermes collectors, people who have a strong relationship with the brand and know how to play the Hermes game and what loopholes to find, because there of course are plenty of loopholes in the system. I am by no means suggesting that you use any one of these, because I would not want you to get blacklisted, but I can tell you that I've been around the block for over a decade. I have friends who have been very serious Hermes collectors, so I've seen quite a bit. My very first home store was the boutique on Madison, which is one of the largest, best performing stores in the US. I think it is, I'm not sure if it is still the best performing. At one point it was between the store on Madison and then the Beverly Hills store. I'm not sure who is leading at this point, but they had some very interesting stories to tell. And I know a lot of people try to have several profiles at the same time. They would have a profile under their actual name and under their maiden name. Some people had profiles for themselves, one for their husband, one for their dog, one for their nanny. I know that some people even have profiles for their kids. So, you know, there were ways around it, and back in the day, Hermes was willing to turn a blind eye, but they're quite strict about it at this point. So I would definitely not suggest that you try to abuse the system, because it's something that you can get blacklisted for really easily, and you will not only get yourself in trouble, but also the person that you're shopping with. And getting a bag, I really don't think is worth someone else's job. And if this is your first time hearing about this quota bag system, I can completely understand how complicated and how insane it sounds, that you would have to follow all these rules just so you can then spend tens of thousands of dollars on a piece. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the way I look at it is that we all have our hobbies. You have to pick your poison. Some people enjoy gambling, some people enjoy traveling, some people enjoy fast cars. Well, others like luxurious handbags. But why do we keep going back for more? Even if this whole system and this idea goes against your very own value system, why are you still drawn to it? Because when it comes to these exclusive pieces, you can get hooked really easily. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to our fundamental desire to be included. If you really enjoy the finer things in life, if you have an appreciation for luxury pieces, it makes perfect sense that you would want to be included in this elite club, because it doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult, exclusion from social groups or exclusive events can leave us feeling overlooked and even inferior in some cases. The pain of not being involved doesn't fade, it often persists into adulthood, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, because when we lived in tribes as hunters-gatherers, to be excluded from your community meant that you couldn't survive. You did not have the protection, you did not have the resources to survive in the wilderness. You needed the support of your community, and we still do. We are still social beings at the end of the day. So it makes perfect sense that you would want to be included and you would want to be accepted. But it just really comes down to how much of your self-worth is really tied to these external things. If it really brings you a lot of sorrow not being able to get your hands off these pieces, and if it really makes you feel inferior, that might be a sign that you should look for some support or you should look for some validation elsewhere. But I really don't think that there's anything wrong with having a passion or a desire to get your hands on these pieces. And I think this want to be included and this want to be seen and validated has only been made worse by social media, because social media has really normalized luxury consumption. It can often feel like that every single person around you has the latest and greatest luxury items, that people are going on lavish holidays, they are staying at the best hotels, and you are lesser than them if you cannot keep up with the Joneses, when in reality, social media is such a small fraction of every single person's life. Of course, it only highlights the very best of their days. Not to mention that just because you see this on social media doesn't mean that every single person around you has this lifestyle. But the way social media works is that they will almost keep you in these echo chambers. The goal of every single social media platform is to keep you on their apps for as long as possible, because the longer you stay on their app, the longer you scroll, the more ads you can be served, and the more ads you're served, the more money the app makes. And they will only serve you content to keep you on their platform that you engage with. So they will often feed content to you that they know you will enjoy seeing, and you'll end up seeing very similar content over and over and over again, which can make you feel like that it is very common for every single person to have one of these luxury items, when in reality, in real life, that might not be the case. Of course, it also depends on where you live and who you surround yourself with. But don't think that social media is an accurate representation of reality, because that is actually not always the case, and it can be insanely misleading. But if this is the content that you consume and these are the people that you surround yourself with, whether that's in a virtual setting or in person, this thing called conformity bias can kick in, which drives us to follow the crowd and, again, not be excluded. So once you have this initial desire for luxury, that can be further intensified by wanting to conform. And the more you see something, the more you're exposed to an idea or a product, the more acceptable you'll find it. So even if you are not someone who is incredibly invested in luxury to begin with, if it's something that you are exposed to on a regular basis, it can actually awaken this desire in you that was never previously there. Now, of course, it will not work if it's something that you are very much against, but this exposure effect works when it comes to how acceptable you find a certain action, how much you like people. You might have heard the term, this person has grown on me. That is purely because you were exposed to that person continuously, and you just found them more acceptable over time. That's the same thing when it comes to luxury items too. At first, it might not be something that you are particularly interested in, but the more you hear about it, the more you see it, the more you'll find that particular piece and that particular idea acceptable and even desirable, which can be further intensified if you want to conform to the people around you. And this idea of exclusivity and desirability is what some luxury brands are able to harness and create even more demand for. Here I'm talking about brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, and of course Hermes. Speaking of which, if you thought that Hermes's game mindset was toxic, wait until we move on to some of these exclusive watch brands, because some of them have waitlists that extend up to years, if not decades. So we'll definitely have some interesting pieces to discuss. But before we do that, I also wanted to talk about why we find scarce and exclusive rare pieces even more desirable, because of course this conformity bias can kick in pretty much every single setting. It does not only apply to luxury consumption and luxury purchases. But it's quite interesting because when it comes to scarce, rare items, we actually perceive them even more valuable. And to understand why that is, again, we have to go back to the beginning of our evolution. Because if you look at it back in the day, when again we lived in tribes and we were hunters and gatherers. We did not have the resources that we have today. Resources that were scarce were seen as more valuable, and that is still an incredibly powerful motivator for us today to want things that are hard to come by. We want to get our hands on them and keep them safe and close to us. So the more rare, the more scarce something is, the more you'll want it, because the more you'll see it as something that is valuable and that will serve you down the line, even if it doesn't really affect your life at the end of the day that much, or if it can actually hurt you down the line. But if we see something as valuable, especially when we first hear about it, if you hear about a piece being rare and exclusive before you even get to make up your mind about whether it's something that you would personally like or not, you will always anchor that information to being exclusive and rare. And if that is the anchoring point, that will automatically increase your perceived value of that piece, and that will influence how much you like it, because that is the first piece of information you'll go back to, the fact that that piece is hard to come by. If it's hard to come by, it must mean that it's more valuable, and so it's something that you should want, even if it's not something that, had you not had that piece of information available, you would have really wanted, because it might not be something that suits your personality, suits your aesthetic, suits your lifestyle, but because the initial piece of information was that it was rare, you will automatically think of it as something more valuable, and hence something that you too should have in your life. And now that we understand why we as customers keep going back for more, let's quickly look at this from the brand's point of view, because I don't think it's always as sinister as brands wanting to take advantage of us and exploiting these intrinsic motives that we have for wanting the most exclusive, more scarce things. Yes, some brands will intentionally limit their production to keep their things exclusive, which I don't think there's anything wrong with. If that's how you want to run your business, that is up to you. And while I do think that in some cases it is a lot more intentional, and they do artificially control their production and how much of their pieces are actually sold and released, in other cases it really just comes down to quality control and manufacturing practices and traditions. Because if you look at something that is incredibly carefully crafted, something that is meticulously done, some things take longer than others. For some brands, it does take a long time to produce something that is incredibly well crafted, and there's only so much of it that they can produce in a given time. Not to mention that if they also put a lot of emphasis on customer service and how you are being delivered your product, it's something that will take time, and it's not something that can be pushed out as quickly as a fast fashion item. Now, of course, brands can grow, and as demand grows, brands try to match that, but that growth has to be intentional. It has to be careful, especially if you do not want to compromise and sacrifice on craftsmanship. So I do think that in a lot of cases, this exclusive mindset and this slow consumption actually serves a purpose. Not to mention that some heritage brands have a long following. They have people who have been loyal to the brand for years, if not decades, and those people will always enjoy priority. So if you're a novice, if you are just getting into a brand, it's possible that there are going to be people who will probably get their hands on these pieces a lot quicker than you would, and that is purely because the brand respects and appreciates the love and effort that those customers have invested into the brand. But without further ado, let's move on to some of the most popular, most exclusive, most difficult to get luxury pieces. And I would also love to hear your thoughts on what you think about these pieces, which one of these pieces you think are just flat out elitist, and which ones are actually justified to have to wait for, starting with the Birkin and the Kelly. Now, of course, you know my thoughts on these pieces. I don't think that Hermes Birkin and Kelly bags are the be-all and end-all of luxury fashion. I do not think that every single person out there needs to sell their firstborn to get their hands on these bags. But if you genuinely have an appreciation for the look of these pieces, if these are things that will fit into your life, one thing is for sure, they are incredibly crafted, but there are some brands and some pieces out there that are very close to what Hermes is able to do for you. But if you have always dreamt of an Hermes bag, credit must be given where credit is due. I do think that their bags are phenomenal, but there are some other bags out there. If you're dreaming of owning a Birkin bag, but it's not something that you want to spend your money on, or something that you can justify buying, I really do like the Ferragamo bag. I actually think I have a video on some Birkin alternatives, which I can link up here for you. That video is a little bit older, so if you would like to see an updated video on that from me, let me know in the comment section. But I think at this point you have so many other incredible alternatives. There are so many incredible contemporary brands that offer bags that will fill a similar gap in your collection, that you do not need to necessarily go to Hermes to get this quality and to get this look and feel. One thing that you have to keep in mind, however, is that Hermes bags can be an investment into your wardrobe, in that they will last a lifetime. There's one thing for sure, these pieces stand the test of time because of their quality. You can also have them repaired, you can have them refreshed, and because they are quite popular on the pre-loved market, because of all the reasons that we've been discussing, you can usually sell them and get a good chunk of your money back, even if you cannot make money off of them, whereas that does not go for other brands and other bags. So that is just an additional layer for you to consider, but I don't think that they are worth your soul in any shape or form. But moving on to another luxury brand, which, you know, I have a hard time talking about this brand because this is one that I was going to talk about here, and that is Loro Piana. The Loro Piana Extra Pockets are bags that I used to rave about all the time. These are not pieces that I have in my collection, but these are pieces that I felt came really close to Hermes bags. In terms of craftsmanship, I felt that they were really beautifully made. I really loved the way they looked and what they did for people. But in case you were not aware, Loro Piana was recently involved in some controversy. I can make sure to link some articles up here for you, but basically Loro Piana has been placed under court administration in Italy because it was alleged that they are involved in some labor exploitation, not themselves directly, but through some of the subcontractors of their subcontractors. What was alleged, if I understand correctly, is that they did not properly oversee their subcontractors, who ended up working with Chinese individuals in Italy who were not paid properly, who were exploited, whose work hours were not respected, and their human dignity was completely neglected and overlooked, which is of course unacceptable. So I think the investigation is still ongoing, but it's just something that I wanted to talk about here when it comes to Loro Piana, because it's important to mention that obviously it has to be taken into consideration when it comes to how and where you spend your money. But in the past, Loro Piana also had a wait list, not only for their extra pocket bags, but also for things like the summer walk and the open walk, which are just as much of a status symbol when it comes to mainly men's fashion as a Birkin or a Kelly, purely because they are so incredibly difficult to come by. As it's been established, Hermes is the brand that is most often hated on for having this elitist approach to who their pieces are offered to, and I do agree with the criticism to an extent. I do think that there needs to be more transparency in terms of why these pieces go to the people that they go to, but thankfully, at the end of the day, no one is forcing you to buy into these pieces, especially with the pre-loved market booming. You have the chance to get your hands on the piece that you want and when you want it, so you do not have to directly get them from the store. And especially because these days the pre-loved market is not nearly as insanely priced as it was before. If you consider the amount of time and money that you would have to invest into building a relationship with one of these brands, you might be better off getting something through a reliable, trustworthy reseller or secondary resource. But what I very much dislike is how often Hermes is criticized for these business practices, yet other brands, and here I am mainly talking about exclusive watch brands, get away with the exact same thing, even though Hermes is a comprehensive lifestyle brand, which means that you have a lot more to explore and a lot more to buy to establish yourself as a serious client. But when it comes to a brand that exclusively does watches, you can only really buy watches over and over again just so you can get your hands on the watch that you wanted all along. And in most cases, you cannot even resell the watches that you bought in the first place, because some of these brands actually track every single piece that leaves their stores. And if they find out that you ended up selling one of your watches, you can get blacklisted and banned for life. And the reason for that, in my opinion at least, is that Hermes is very often associated with women. It is a brand that is frequented by women, and it is collected by a lot of women. Of course, not exclusively by women. Case in point, I'm sitting here talking about it, but it is a brand that, and handbags are usually seen as something that women will collect. So it can be downplayed as something frivolous, as something self-indulgent, as something just silly. But if men are buying watches, then those are serious investment pieces that should be taken seriously and that should not be criticized, which is of course not something that I agree with in any shape or form. But I do think that some of these watch brands are way more toxic than Hermes will ever be. And let's start with Rolex, because that is the brand that I have the most personal experience with. If you'd like to hear my personal experience with Rolex and hear me talk about the first Rolex watch I ever purchased, I will have a video linked up here for you where I share my thoughts on the Submariner, which I bought in two-tone. Now, Rolex is also notorious for being incredibly selective with who they release their watches to, especially when it comes to their more popular watches, the Submariner and the Daytona in stainless steel. Now, it's not only their stainless steel watches that are difficult to get at this point, it's also their two-tone and their solid precious gold pieces. But the reason stainless steel watches are a little bit more difficult to come by than any other metal finish is because they are more accessibly priced. So the pool of people who can afford or who are willing to spend the price of a stainless steel watch is a lot bigger. You're competing against a lot more people than you would if you were buying something that was more expensive, because a stainless steel watch might cost you $10,000 compared to a solid gold watch that would set you back $40,000, $50,000. That group of people, that pool of people is much smaller, so your competition is not quite as bad. So that is why those watches are a little bit easier to get compared to stainless steel watches. But Rolex is a brand that produces, according to estimates, close to 1 million watches a year. So I definitely think that their scarcity and how rare their watches are is artificial. I don't think it is completely justified. Whereas when it comes to a brand like Patek Philippe, let's say, or even AP, they produce much fewer watches. So when it comes to Rolex, a Submariner or a Daytona can take up to 3 to 5 years for you to get your hands on. I think if you walk into an AD, an authorized dealer, because Rolex doesn't actually own their own boutiques, you can only get Rolex watches through authorized dealer, little known fact, they will tell you that the wait can take up to 3 to 5 years. But when it comes to a popular Patek watch, here I'm talking about a 5711, which is also known as the Nautilus watch. I always have a hard time pronouncing that watch. I don't know why that is. Or one of their more sporty models like the Aquanaut, which is just as popular as the 5711, except, I mean, it is a completely different watch, but it's very often mentioned on the same page because these are Patek's two most popular models. Those can take up to 10 years to get your hands on if you want to establish yourself as a client and if you want to get directly from the store. And Patek is a brand that only really produces around 60,000 watches a year. And that does not mean that they produce 60,000 of these popular models, but they produce 60,000 pieces of every single model that they do in their collections. And then, of course, AP is the ultimate status symbol, and it has been for the past couple of years. And their Royal Oak is the watch that everyone seems to want. I do not understand the hype. To me, it is not only one of the most dangerous watches to wear at this point because it pretty much puts a target on your back, but to me, it is quite cheap and tacky looking. do forgive me. I know I'm going to be in the minority here. I know everyone loves those watches, but I really do not like the way they look. I don't like the face. I do not like the band that they come with. I don't like them in any one of the finishes. To me, it is just an extremely try-hard watch. Again, if you're a fan, please forgive me for saying that, but that is just my personal opinion. The good thing is that you can spend your money on whatever you want to, and I can do whatever I want with my own money, but I'm just not a fan of the Royal Oak, and I really do not get the hype. But what I can tell you is that AP is, as far as I understand, is the brand that produces the least amount of watches compared to Patek, who produces 60,000 watches a year. AP only produces 50,000, and it is incredibly competitive to get your hands on one of those watches. You will be asked to go into the store for an interview. They will pretty much interrogate you, and it's only then that you will get the chance to get on the wait list. And AP is the brand that I was talking about earlier, who actually tracks pretty much every single watch that leaves their stores. They have an online system where you will have to register the warranty, and you have to put your name on it. As soon as the watch changes hands, it will have to be updated online, so the brand will be notified. So it is something that has its own lore and its own system. It's not something that I ever want to get into, because again, it's just not a watch that I personally like the look of. To me, it's just not my personal cup of tea. But the 5711 I do really like from Patek. It's not something that's on my radar or on my list, but I do appreciate the look of it. But personally, Rolex is my favorite brand when it comes to watches, and I do like some of Patek's other more classic, more traditional watches. But this brings us to the end of today's video about some of the most elitist, most exclusive luxury brands, depending on how you choose to look at it. I cannot wait to hear your thoughts in the comment section about these business practices and about these particular pieces. Do you own any one of these pieces? Do you own all of these pieces? Are you a collector? I would love to hear your thoughts. And would you consider spending your hard-earned money on a piece that you have to jump through hoops for or just wait for? I think at the end of the day, if you are getting something that was meticulously crafted, that has a ton of love and respect and heritage invested in, I can see why there would be a wait for it. But if it's just artificial and it feels phony and inauthentic, I can completely understand why those brands would receive criticism. But I would love to hear what you have to say. The comment section is open for you as always. And while you're down there, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I really appreciate you being here and watching, and I will see you back here with a new video really, really soon.